Morning, everyone. My name is Sylvia Corish, as I was introduced. Thank you, Rob, for the invitation. This is quite a different audience for me to speak with. I normally speak with educators and children and parents and community members, so quite a different area for me to talk about. Just a little bit of my background. I'm called a Director of Schools in the public education system, and part of that role is that I line manage 38 principals. And I line manage 38 principals in the public education sector in an area called Port Jackson, which runs along the south part of the harbour, from Balmain up to Vaucluse, Bondi Beach, Sydney Girls, Sydney Boys, back around to Glebe, back around to Balmain. An area that there's a huge amount of development in. And so, it's a large growth area. So being the director for that area, I have started to work very closely and we're given them responsibility with many, many others for considering what's needed in terms of redeveloping our schools in that area and also for building new schools in that area, in the inner city area. So some of the projects that I'm leading as a director, the educational component of the project, because we work obviously very closely with our assets division in the department, they're the experts in terms of the planning and the building and the creating, I suppose. But my role is to bring an educational perspective to what we're building, and that's why design excellence is very important for us in terms of designing newer classrooms, newer schools that will take us further into the future. Just a really quick snapshot. We're at the moment doing a extension. We're building additional classrooms at Bourke Street Public School, Bellevue Hill Public School. There's a huge development taking that up to 1,000 students for 1,000 students. I'm involved with the Ultimo Pyrmont Public School project, the new design of that school, the new Inner Sydney High School, which will be built on the Cleveland Street, Chalmers Road, our side on that corner. That involves moving the school that's currently there, which is Cleveland Street Intensive English High School. It's moving to one of our sites at Alexandria, which we are redeveloping the Mitchell Road site at Alexandria. And in doing that, we also then move the Alexandria campus back onto Alexandria Park Community School, which is a K-12 school, which is currently on 2 sites, but we're putting that back onto 1 site. So there's a huge amount of development. There'll be other things coming along as well. So, as you'd appreciate, schools are unique in the sense that obviously we have great duty of care to our students. We have to ensure that we continue with the quality teaching and learning while things are happening around our children and our staff. So for 2 of those projects, we have just completed designing what we're calling pop-up schools, which are demandable schools. We thought the idea of a pop-up school was a really good message to send to our community, particularly the Ultimo Pyrmont community that's been very active, as some of you might be aware about what's been happening in terms of that project. But we need to get the children off the site and the staff off site so we can build. So we've just gone through a process of designing, with architects, designing a pop-up school on the Wentworth Park site. So they will be there while we redevelop Ultimo Public School, and also a pop-up school for Alexandria Park Community School while we redevelop the whole school site. So very, very important aspects in terms of our pedagogy and what we're doing. So from an educator's perspective, what is it that we're looking for in terms of design excellence, and how are we going about trying to achieve this? Just a little bit of educational philosophy before I talk about the design excellence process. As you'd appreciate, life today is very different from 50 years ago. It's a very different process, and it's what was considered good education 50 years ago or even 30 years ago is quite different to what we consider a good educational provision today. I know I'm getting on. When I was speaking to an architect the other day, and I was trying to explain our notion of future-focused learning and what that means in terms of designing classrooms for the future. And I said to her, children these days, we need to do more than think about the 3 R's. And she said, what are the 3 R's? I thought, okay, so reading, writing and arithmetic. But we talk about the 4 C's these days. We talk about coming from 21st century skills. In our material, you'll see a lot about 21st century skills. And so what does that mean in terms of designing a classroom or spaces for 21st century learners? A few years ago, a few of us were sitting in a room and we said, well, what happens when we're beyond the 21st century? What happens with the 22nd century? So we coined the phrase of future-focused learning. So a lot of the department's materials that you will see will talk about that. That's the focus. So the 4 C's are critical thinking, communication, collaboration and creativity. They're the things that our students need for the future. So we need to make sure that we have spaces that empower our teachers to be able to work in and provide that more enhanced pedagogy for our students. I'm not talking about classrooms because teaching and learning these days is well beyond the classroom. So you'll still see 21st century learning talked about, but future focused is what you'll see in our materials. So what does that look like in terms of classrooms that we're building now, schools we're redeveloping now for the future? We're talking about things like much wider verandas. So instead of just using it as a circulation space, we've got level flooring so that students can pull out tables on chairs and tables and chairs so that they can use the space outside the classroom. Just by adding another metre, for example, or 1.5 metres, you can end up with this really nice space where the students can decide where they're going to sit and learn and work outside. Projecting artwork on walls, we've got some of our schools that are doing that. Anzac Park Public School, for example, they got permission to do that. Walls that are movable so that we can, we've got some of our designs where we've got two wall spaces that are moving so that we can create up to 5 different configurations for a teacher. They can have a big space or 5 smaller spaces depending on what they want to do in terms of the classroom. Outdoor space is crucial, and in terms of the city area, for example, we're trying to ensure that we have we maximise our building space so that we can have green space for the students, that we do have some place for them to have passive play, that we still do have trees in our schools, we still do have green space in our schools, and obviously multi-storey. So in terms of the department, I've been very privileged in the last few years to work with a lot of architects and planners and people from council who've taught me lots of different acronyms and all sorts of things. But we have one of our own acronyms, and it's called the Educational Facility Standards and Guidelines. So what's been really crucial for us is that those are guidelines now. Once upon a time they were standards. You were told that you had to design something that, here's the space, each space has to have a wet area and this amount of space for bags and all those sorts of things. What the department has now saying is that we're able to combine those spaces. So instead of saying, here's your 6 classrooms, is there some creative way that we can put those 6 classrooms together so that we can share wet areas? We might have a specialist art room in the middle of it or something like that, which is giving our architects, people in the audience, much more scope in terms of being able to create more collaborative spaces that the teachers can use in terms of pedagogy. So most of our projects, some of our projects are self-funded. The new Sydney Girls High School, Sydney Boys High School Performance Centre is self-funded by the schools. But even though that's self-funded, there are still departmental requirements in terms of what happens the same as planning. But most recently, we've got into the design excellence competition mode for some of our projects, and obviously they're the ones that are state significance and obviously projects that are worth more than $30 million. So the ones that we've done so far, and the things that, and we're learning the process as we go along, we're refining the process. I hope, Olivia, we're one of the areas where you say that we do focus very deeply on what happens when we do this design competition. We are? Great. So the Parramatta project, which was announced at the beginning of the year, which combines Arthur Phillip High School and Parramatta Primary School, that the design for that was done through a design competition process. On Wednesday, we announced the new head design consultants for the Ultimo Pyrmont Public School, and of course the Inner Sydney High School is also operating through a design competition as well. I'll just give you a little bit of background about the Ultimo Pyrmont Public School. This is all public information now as of Wednesday. So in terms of Ultimo Pyrmont, the head design consultants is a consortium of Design Inc, Lacoste Stevenson and BMC2. Now originally it was a 3-stage process, which we had 21 consortia worldwide who applied to build that school, redesign that school. Then that was from an open expression of interest. From that, 7 were selected to request for tender stage, and then 5 of those were selected to proceed to the Design Excellence competition stage. So that's how the Ultimo Pyrmont one worked. Regardless of the project, regardless how it's funded, regardless how we get the architects or the quantity surveyors, it's really important that we get the right mix of personnel when we're designing an educational facility. We need the right architects, project managers, quantity surveyors and educators. And from the department's perspectives, it's interesting, we have a schools line, of course, and we have an assets line. More and more, assets is calling on the schools line, and I'm from the schools line, educators, to be part of that process. They're demanding that we're part of that process, because while our assets people in the department are very skilled at working with architects and getting something, it's the teachers that have to work in that space and the teachers who work with the children in that space. I was interested in what Peter was talking about, design can be used for unlocking new possibilities. So the challenge we have is that we need our architects working closely with us. They tread a very fine line. We want them to design things that are future focused, we want them to design things that are pushing the boundaries, but they also need to work with our principals and our communities. But people like me want them also to push the principals. I want to be able to work with the architects to say, principals, we're not just designing the way you're currently teaching. We want something more than that. We want design excellence to move us beyond what you've got. So what comes with that is a lot of professional development for the staff. So we need to make sure that working alongside our architects, we're developing schools, educational facilities that work pedagogically, but are also pushing the boundaries to make sure that we can stretch our teachers to make sure that they are teaching for our students' needs in the future. So it's a complex area because a beautifully designed learning space doesn't necessarily determine the quality of what happens in the classroom. I can take you to schools where there's very ordinary spaces, originally very ordinary spaces, where there's outstanding teaching happening. So it's that real combination of how we use the design excellence to help us move it forward. It's a really exciting time to be working closely with architects and a range of different people. We've got some really fantastic things that are happening in our schools, and there's more to come. So I'd like to acknowledge the architects that we've been working with on our projects and their creativity in helping us come up with some wonderful designs that will position our schools and therefore our students better for the future. It's really uplifting, and it's a very exciting time to be involved with it. So thank you.